was part of the team that put together the Nigeria Industrial Revolution Plan. So that's actually a strategy document, right, that exists. And we looked at the document when we came, and we concluded that that document is a good document, but needs to be implemented. So it's not just all talk. And like you asked, what specific steps have we taken? We've taken several steps, but in the interest of time, let me just identify three. The first one is that we must create an environment, right, enabling environment for people to go about business, because it's industrialization is done by industrialists and by people, so that it's easier and it's less expensive, or it's not too costly to do business here. So there's a wide-ranging enabling environment initiative, which that the president launched, which is actually beginning to gain consciousness in the country, and I'm sure you're aware of that. But more specifically, when it comes to industrialization, because that cuts across and helps everybody, we then decided by looking, first of all, we looked at how other countries, because this is not a new problem. Countries have industrialized, and they've done it in stages, in other words, in phases. I mean, the West, then the East, and we believe it's Africa's turn. And you find that in most of those cases, because they did not have enough resources to build infrastructure everywhere, they focused on specific areas, centers of excellence where industrialization can take place. And that's this whole idea or theme of industrial parks and special economic zones. And this is best practice, right? So you can concentrate your efforts so that the industry people can be competitive. And we have come up with a strategy. It's been approved by the cabinet and it's been implemented. And it ties into your earlier question. One group alone is prepared to invest in three. And those three are going to be world-class centers. That's why we're working with world-class companies that are making world-class investments. So we have a project called the Made in Nigeria for Export Initiative, which is another way to test your level of industrialization. Can you even export things that where value has been added here? I'm
wondering, Honorable, let's quickly take a question from some of our viewers who are very interested in what we're discussing this morning. Elvis Dagana is saying we should ask you why the federal government prefers to take loans from the Chinese instead of engaging them in build, operate, and transfer arrangements via PPP. Is it?
So I'll take that question, but I need to complete this question because, he asked a very important question on industrialization, and I said the third point is important, just so that for the record, right, because I might not come back to it. The third thing we have done is that we have started something called the Nigeria Industrial Policy and Competitiveness Advisory Council. Now, this is a council, a presidential council again, where the private sector, the industrialists, meet with the senior government officials, ministers, and other key players in government, and other key stakeholders in industry. And they meet every month. And are working on 5 critical problems. I mean, in the interest of time, I won't go into that. I'll now return to your question about why borrow from China rather than going into build, operate, transfer. First, build, operate, transfer is just one type of project finance. So the two are actually not either or. So when you hear we've done 5 billion in investments, or you hear them talk about 60 billion, some of them will be build, operate, transfer. That build, operate, transfer means that the person has brought money to build it, and that he will transfer it, and that you have to pay him back or get the money back. So it's one way to ensure sustainability. So the build, operate, transfer is a how question. You know what I mean? It's how you make a loan sustainable in project finance. And I agree with the person. But and I also agree that it shouldn't only be China, but certainly build, operate, transfer, or public-private partnership where you have a private sector partner and it's a joint venture for life. These are all mechanisms to create sustainability and to make sure the project is not abandoned after it's built. I agree that some of the projects may still build, operate, transfer, like the railway projects, where they are building, they can operate for a while, transfer it to us, and then you build up the capacity to run it. It also ties into the question of making sure you're not having foreigners just come and sit there going nowhere. So you have time frames during which they must complete what they're doing, and it's measurable, and it's something that can be, tested so that you...
But it's not a preference of the federal government?
No, it's a preference of the federal government as one type, and I've given you examples where it's operating. For instance, I think that in some of the infrastructure projects, like the railway, where the people come in, what should happen is that, like, they build it. If you look at what we're trying to do with GE, that's an example. The project we're trying to do with GE, that's a build, operate, transfer example.
Honorable Minister, what is the status right now? What is the federal government's current position on the African Continental Free Trade Agreement? We know that various interest groups have come in. We've heard from the Ghanaian president, the South African president encouraging us to sign. Why is it that we have not signed, and is it in our national interest?
So it's an excellent question again, and an excellent topic to cover, because we believe that the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement will have a huge impact on Africa if properly implemented and executed. So, as you know, the African heads of state and government took a decision, I think in 2012 or so, to enter into this agreement. You know, what then happened is that they set a date to enter into the agreement. Now, the original approach was going to be you sign a framework, that is a conceptual agreement, and then you go back home, you know, and build consensus and then flesh out the agreement in terms of the implementation. So you set the parameters and then you bring in the, you know, private sector and all the stakeholders. In the case of Nigeria, and I believe with the benefit of hindsight, it was a good move. You know, some of those stakeholders, many of those stakeholders, state governments, trade associations, and so on, industry groups, basically said, we want to be in on it early because we know this thing is important. You know, so the president then directed us to work with those groups first, you know, and after we basically get our act together in terms of working together to agree on how we'll approach the agreement, he would then sign. He didn't want to sign and then we start fleshing out. And by the way, this agreement, just like the other, like European Union and all the other agreements, is a 50-year agreement. So, you know, so it's not a case of speed necessarily being the best thing. I think also being thorough helps. Okay. And that work is ongoing.
Well, I want to get to the visit by some international heads of state, particularly British Prime Minister Theresa May and German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and what that meant for trade. We heard, particularly during Merkel's visit, about the federal government signing an MOU with Volkswagen to assemble cars in Nigeria. Yes. The question is, how sustainable are some of these partnerships, and will they be implemented to the letter?
Again, I like your focus on sustainability and implementation, because those are my two favorite themes, actually, so we have that in common. Let me deal with the German Chancellor's visit, and then I'll come back to Prime Minister May's visit. The German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, came because, in her view, you know, that partnership with Africa, the time for it is now, right? And also, I believe that, like, the strong delegation she came with must have had, you know, something to do with that. For us, it's a good sign because we've always believed that, like, those partnerships properly constructed and properly implemented will create value for both sides. And the example you use is probably one of the better examples, Volkswagen. Volkswagen, you know, is a world-class auto manufacturer. And they basically have been talking to us about establishing a hub in Nigeria to cover not just the West African market, maybe even beyond. You know, and so we use the opportunity of the Chancellor's visit to sign a memorandum of understanding that basically says they will come and build a hub here in phases. Right?
Oh, a hub for the region, not just for the country.
Yeah, a hub for the region, yes, in phases. And I negotiated the agreement, and I have to tell you, I found it refreshing. And remember that my background is negotiations. I was in investment business for well over 20 years. And
Honourable Minister, I'm afraid I have to interrupt you, and if you get the chance to focus on the visit of Theresa May as well when we come back from this break. Please stay with us.
Thank you.